I'm knitting the 10 stitch blanket pattern by Frankie Brown. You can find the pattern on Ravelry, and she's given me permission to do this video, and I'm mostly following her pattern, but there's a few things I'm doing differently, so I want to record that. I'm doing a different slip on the edges and a couple of other things that have made it easier for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and show the few techniques that I'm going to be using for my blanket. The pattern calls for a longtail cast on, but I'm going to do a crochet cast on, and the way I do it is I start with a slip knot on my crochet hook, and then I just do some chains over the top of the needle. The thing you have to watch for here is to keep it loose, because this can be tighter than your other edges, and they won't look the same. So I just kind of size them as I go and pull up on it as I need to keep it loose but consistent. I want this edge to look like my slipped edges, and I won't be slipping the way the pattern calls for. 8, and that's 9, and then I'm going to take the 10th loop and put it onto the tip of my knitting needle. So that's what the cast on edge is going to look like. I'm going to start my garter stitch beginning square, and I'm going to slip with the yarn in front purlwise on every row, the beginning of every row. The pattern calls for you to slip knitwise, but after I've done a few rows I can show you what the stitch looks like on the side. So I'm going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and then I'm going to snug that up and bring the yarn to the back between the needles and continue to knit the row. And I'm always counting that first slipped stitch just as if I knitted it. So sometimes I'm going to mention the slip, sometimes I'm just going to do it automatically without. I may say knit 10 stitches, well, I'm going to count that as a knit stitch. If you're going to do it this way, you need to try to always slip in that manner on the edge, because if you accidentally skip one, you'll be able to see it on the side. You'll see a little bump on the side. So that's my first row, and I'm going to do one more and then continue with the rest of my 9 ridges, which is 18 rows. So I'm going to slip with the yarn in front purlwise, bring the yarn to the back between the needles, and then knit the rest of the row. And that is my first ridge. Alright, I finished the 9 ridges, and they're easy to count with garter stitch. And the way the edges look when you slip purlwise with the yarn in front, you get this little twisted chain or twisted knit stitch on the side, and it looks very similar to the crochet cast on. So if you want to untwist it, you would have to knit through the back loop at the end of every row, but that's a little bit too much work. So this gives you a nice straight edge, and it gives you a choice when you get ready to join, whether you want to pick up both loops, whether you want to pick up the back loop or the front loop to join in. So those are things that we'll talk about when I get to that point. So now it's time to start the first double mitered corner. The first corner is always going to be double, and then from now on it'll be single corners. Okay, I placed a marker on the right side of the blanket, and I'm still going to be slipping the first stitch purlwise on this outside edge even when I'm doing the corners. The inside edge is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to pass the yarn to the back and I'm going to knit 9, so that's 2, and this is the way the pattern calls for. So you take the yarn and you bring it forward and slip the stitch that you're wrapping over to the right needle. Bring the yarn to the back and slip that stitch back over to the left needle. And then you're going to turn, excuse me, and bring the needle to the back, the yarn to the back, and then knit those 9 stitches again. You don't slip on the inside edge here in these corners when you're going for the return. The only time I do that is on the 10th return, and I'm going to show that when I get to it. So I'm just going to do this one more time because I want to show you how I keep track of my wraps. Instead of having to use a row counter to keep track of how many wraps you've done, the 10th stitch over here on this side has been wrapped, and it's got a little knot on it, but that's the wrap. And the ones that have a purl bump, you can see clearly that's a purl bump on each one of these. If it has a purl bump on the back side of it, then this stitch has not been wrapped yet. So I know I need to knit 8 and wrap this 9th stitch and turn. So every time I see these bumps, I know that the last one is the one that needs to be wrapped. So let me do a few of these wraps and turns. The next one's going to be 9. I'm going to knit 8 and then wrap and turn, then 7, 6, 5, 4, and so on. I'm still working on my short row decreases. I just wanted to show that you can clearly see that these 3 stitches have been wrapped and the rest of these have not, because you can clearly see the bumps. On multicolored yarn or bumpy yarn might be a little bit hard to see, but in that case you may have to find some other method of figuring out where your wraps are, but this works for me. So I'm going to continue with my short row decreases, wrapping the last stitch that has a bump on it until I get down to the last single stitch. Okay, I'm nearing the end of the first short row decrease, the first part of the corner, and I still need to wrap stitch number 3. So I'm just going to do these last few stitches. So that's 1, 2, and then wrap number 3. Put it back on the left needle and turn. And I'm not slipping on the return, so I'm going to knit 1, 2. Now the pattern, she has a note in the patterns that says that when you get down to where you're going to be only knitting 1 stitch, that you don't slip it, you just knit it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, but I'm still going to slip it, knit, I'm going to go ahead and knit it. So I knit it. It's a little awkward for me because I got into the habit of slipping. So I knit that 1 stitch and then I wrap the 2nd stitch. And then I turn and I knit 1. So that's the 9th ridge. Those 2 rows were the 9th ridge. So you're going to end up with a little knot right there because we didn't slip. And that's going to be your corner stitch. And then it's time to start the increases to turn that corner back in the other direction. Just wanted to point out that I continued, when I was doing my short row decreases, I continued with the slip with the yarn purlwise. And the reason there's a little knot there is because we didn't slip on that corner. But that's going to be directly in the corner with the joins, and it does help to locate where the corners are. So that gives you that extra stitch in the corner. So we're going to start the increases, and the pattern says to knit 2, so I'm going to slip 1, 2. And then we're going to wrap and turn again this third stitch, but we're not going to pick up the wrap. Normally you'd pick up that wrap and put it on the needle, but I'm not picking up the wraps ever, so I'm going to bring the yarn to the front, slip that stitch over, and then put it back, and then knit 2. And then you keep increasing until you get down to the last stitch. So when I wrapped that third stitch, it brought it in closer to the other 2, so I can clearly see the gaps where the next stitch needs to be wrapped, and that's the number 4. So on the next row, I'm going to knit 3, wrap the 4, and then turn back and knit 3, and then that'll bring this one in closer, and then you'll see the next gap. So you don't really have to use a row counter. It's very easy to see. So let me do that one more time. I'm going to slip the first stitch and then knit 3, wrap the 4th one, and turn and knit the 3 again. And you can see the corner turning, and you can see the little knot there where I didn't slip that stitch. So continue on till you get to the 10th stitch. I'm coming to the end of step 2 of the double corner, where I knit 9, I wrapped and turned on stitch number 10, and then I knit 9 back to the beginning. I need to, the pattern calls for you to knit 10 and then turn and knit 10, but I'm going to do it differently because I don't want an extra stitch here in the corner, and I want this little spot right here to be really tight. And I also don't want to disturb the 9 ridges. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I need these 9 ridges along here to join into, so I don't want to disturb those. So I'm not going to join in any one of these ridges because I want to preserve those when I start to join the side. So I'm going to knit over to the 10th stitch. I'm going to slip the first one. So that's 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to slip it like we're going to do when we do the joins. I'm just going to slip it over, and then I'm going to find, I'm not going to use that first stitch because that's what I need for my join later. I'm just going to find a spot right in the corner, and I'm going to take my working yarn, wrap it around the needle, and pull that loop through. So now I have 11 stitches on my needle. And I need to get rid of that 10th stitch that I did not knit. And I'm just going to pass it over the loop that I pulled up. And this is exactly the way the joins are done. And now I'm going to turn and go back. But I don't want to knit this stitch because I don't want to add an extra stitch right here in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the yarn in front, and I'm going to slip that loop over. Now it'll stretch out because there's nothing holding it together. It's the one that we pulled up from the working yarn. So I'm just going to tighten that up, bring my yarn back to the back between the needles, and I'm going to knit the 9 stitches back. So that's really the only thing different is I'm not knitting all 10 of those stitches on the way in on that first row of that last ridge. And I feel like it gives it a little bit tighter join there in the middle because we're doing that double miter corner. We have to immediately start the next corner, and this can, in my opinion, build up too many stitches right there. So as long as you're not affecting how many stitches you end up on each edge of the corner, as long as you're not disturbing the pattern in that manner, then you should still have the correct number of stitches on all sides after doing all of the ridges. So now I'm going to start the second corner. So the second corner of the double mitered corner is pretty much the same. You're going to do the short row decreases back and forth until you get to ridge number 9, and when you get down to this single stitch, knit it instead of slipping it, and then do the increase back to the other side, and then we'll get ready to join this other edge. I'm at the end of step 4 of the double corner, and I need to wrap stitch number 10, so I'm pretty much going to do all of the rest of the corners the same after this second corner of the double corner. So I'm going to get down to stitch number 10 and wrap it. So that's 9, and I'm going to wrap stitch number 10 and turn, and the pattern says to knit 9 back, which is what I'm going to do. Now, the joins are all going to be the same after every corner, and I have 9 ridges on the side that I need to join into. We're not going to count this cast on edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is the first ridge that needs to be joined into, and I'm going to choose a loop to stitch into. Right here, I did not slip. I can see the mistake that I made. It's not a catastrophe if you didn't slip. Just make sure you're not joining 10 ridges instead of 9. Just make sure you count your ridges and then just choose a loop. It's all going to be taken up in the stitches. So I'm going to skip over that one when I get to it because that's an extra knot that I don't need to join into. So I'm just going to pay attention to the ridges when I'm joining. So the last step that I did was I wrapped stitch number 10 and I knit 9 back. So I'm going to knit over to the inside edge. I'm still slipping the same way. So that's 9. I think the pattern says to slip knitwise the 10th stitch before the join, but I'm just going to slip it purlwise over to the other needle, and I'm going to leave the yarn in the back. And then I'm going to choose a loop to join into. And here's that 9th ridge when you count down from the top. So I can choose to pick up both of the loops, the back loop or the front loop. And these are the V's. It looks like a V. I can go in and join there or here. I like to just stick my needle down into the V and grab that back loop, and then wrap my yarn around my needle and pull a loop through. And then we're going to pass that slip stitch over. Normally you do that with your needle. and it gives you a little bit of a chain there in the middle. And on the way back, I am not going to knit that first stitch. I'm going to slip it with the yarn in front and slip it purlwise. And that's a loose loop, so I need to snug it up and bring my yarn back and knit 9. So that's how every join is going to be done. You just need to make sure that you have the 9 ridges that you need along that edge to maintain the pattern. So I should have 8 stitches left to do, or 8 ridges left to do on the join. So each time I get down to the last stitch, I'm going to slip it, pull up a loop, and then on the turn I'm going to slip that again. I'm not sure how the pattern says to do that, but I believe it says to knit, but I'm only going to slip on the way back with the yarn in front. When I was practicing this before, on this one I picked up 2 loops when I was joining, and you can see it sort of makes a double chain on there, and it's a little bit thicker ridge. It still looks the same on the back, but if you don't want that thick ridge, on this one I picked up the back loop, and what that does is you end up with, let's see if I can see it, you end up with this extra little loop here, and that's the front loop of that side edge. If you pick up the front loop, then the back loop is going to show up on the other side of the fabric. So there's not a whole lot of difference in whether you pick up the front loop or the back loop. It's just where that extra loop is going to show up. But this makes a thinner ridge if you only pick up 1 loop, and then you get the thicker edge if you pick up 2 loops. I'm going to join one more time and then knit to the end of the joins, and then come back at the cast on edge. So I'm knitting 9, I'm still slipping on that outside edge. I'm going to slip that 10th stitch over, pull up a loop in the next stitch. This is where, see if I can show it. This is that back loop we picked up a while ago. You can pull on your knitting and you can see that it's connected, and the front loop is still just hanging around there. So the next one we need to pick up is this one. So I'm going to stick my needle in there, pull up a loop, and then pass that slip stitch over. And then on the return, I'm going to slip with my yarn in front, tighten that up, bring the yarn back between the needles, and knit back to the beginning. My dog is snoring. All right. So I need to join the rest of these ridges up to the cast on edge, and then I'll just give you some tips when I get to that point. I finished joining up the first side, and I'm going to be coming up to the cast on edge next. So I'm going to work another single corner here with the same techniques as before. But when I get ready to join, I'm going to have to look for this slip knot that I started with on my crochet cast on, and the first loop that I'm going to join into is right here. So that's really the only thing that's different with the way you join. It looks a little bit different on the crochet cast on edge. Okay, I'm not going to show any more of the blanket because I just wanted to take care of a few little areas that I changed for my purposes. But it's a really easy pattern to do, and you just keep going till your blanket is the size that you want it to be.